guys who are in the audience, Mrs. Loya, who's sitting next to the city attorney, she's one of the 5 members of the board, but because of her ambulatory restrictions right now, she's not able to make it up the steps. That's why she'll be hearing cases from the city attorney station. But she is a voting member of the board. Before we jump into the first item, did you want to...
Mr. Kinch said we could let that go.
Okay, very good. Then first case, first public hearing. Omar, would you like to read it off for us?
Good afternoon, Chairman, board members. Case number 2019-007-B, public hearing and action to consider a variance from Chapter 320, Article 2, sidewalk facilities to allow for a 36-inch sidewalk for a property at Lot 2, Block 1, Mejia Road Subdivision, located at 1625 West Price Road, as requested by Hector Guerra.
Very good. Public hearing is now open.
Section 320-37, design standards. If physical constraints, sidewalk continuity, urban type development, or other factors require sidewalks to be placed against the back of the curb, the width of sidewalk should be increased to a minimum of 5 feet. This is the property in question. This is a survey of the property in question. This is the proposed development that is currently under construction at that same property. This is a photo of the same lot.
Before the construction.
We have additional photos.
But that particular picture was before construction started?
Uh-huh,
Yeah.
correct. This is currently under construction. These are additional photos submitted by the applicant. This is a different site. This is an aerial of the same lot showing a walking path along Price Road. This portion here, as you can see. Staff recommendation, the Plan Development Services Department does not support this variance request to allow a 36-inch sidewalk because it does not comply with Chapter 320 requirements.
Which requires 5 feet.
If it is going to be adjacent to the curb, yes, sir. The requirement adjacent to the property line is 4 feet.
So this would be 4 or 5?
As proposed by
He's proposing 3, but what's the standard on this, 4 or 5?
the standard requirement is 4 feet when adjacent to the property line.
And in this case?
It should be 5 because it is
Okay.
adjacent to the curb.
Okay.
It doesn't have a buffer between the curb and the sidewalk.
And he wants it to be 3 feet adjacent to the curb.
Correct,
He's asking for 2 feet is my point.
correct.
And the sidewalk we're talking about here is the red at the bottom, correct?
Correct. The variance request was to allow a 36-inch sidewalk or 2 feet less, however you want to.
Very good.
All right, Mr. Ochoa, you're not compelled to answer these because these are things that the client, the applicant brought up in his letter. But he talks about having bad drainage problems if he has to go for 5 feet. He talks about the fact there's no other sidewalks in the area. He talks about the fact that he has a odd-shaped lot. If you'd like, would you like to speak to any of those hardships that the client brings up?
Well, the approved site plan, this one, first of all, the sidewalk is outside the property. So the drainage, he's only in charge of the drainage inside the property, and that has been already approved by the engineering department when this project was approved. Second, the odd shape of the lot should not have any interference on the size of the sidewalk. As you can see in that aerial, that's why we included it. It shows already that people use this frontage of the lot to walk from one end to the other. And I forgot about.
It was that there's no other sidewalks in the immediate area.
Yeah, that's true. This is a redeveloping area, but it still is required. That's why we're bringing this variance to you.
Thank you, Mr. Ochoa.
Mr. Ochoa, I see there's some pictures of the first cash pawn included in the attachments here.
Correct.
Since that sidewalk is not next to the curb, is that a 4-foot sidewalk? Maybe?
I don't have that information with me, to tell you the truth.
Okay.
I've ridden my bike down there. It doesn't seem like it, but I could be wrong. All right, is there anyone here in the audience who'd like to speak on this application?
Good afternoon. My name is Hector Guerra.
Hello, Mr. Guerra.
Hello. Good afternoon, gentlemen. I just wanted to say again that this is my property. This is a project that is going to be our offices, and I just want to make sure that all the way from Central Boulevard to Price Road, there aren't any sidewalks. So I just wanted to reinforce that I do consider that not too many people use that sidewalk. There's an apartment complex in the back that I think I've been in the site for almost a day, and you can probably see like 3 or 4 people at the most every day just walking there. I wanted, from the beginning, I wanted to ask not to have the sidewalk, but I've been in situations where I see pedestrians walking on the street, and it doesn't seem appropriate for them to be walking. So that's why I wanted to at least make it 36 inches all the way to the sidewalk, to the street, because there's plenty, there's not plenty of space between where the new location of the sidewalk is going to be all the way to the building, because I put the building all the way to the front, so there's a limit space of 10 feet. And I'm supposed to put a swale that I need that space to get the water from the new parking lot to the other side of the green area.
When we're talking about the swale there for drainage, is that in conjunction with the plan that city engineering approved for drainage?
It should be, but it should be inside the property.
The swale should be inside the property, and there is at least 5 feet outside the property line that would allow for a 5-foot sidewalk?
It at least, if we see the survey, I don't know if it is too clear, but it is at least 8 feet in between the curb and the property line.
Yep, I see that. So, Mr. Guerra, and I could understand if you were here asking for a variance to not have to put a sidewalk at all, because there are no other sidewalks in the area, that would stand to reason. But the fact that there are no other sidewalks when your application is only for a 36-inch sidewalk, that wouldn't be a mitigating factor. If the swale, according to your design, and I believe I see that on here, the 3-foot grass swale, is that the one you're referring to?
Yes, sir.
There still seems to be plenty of space between that and the red lines where the sidewalk's proposed to be at. So what other hardship or mitigating factor can you offer? Because it doesn't appear that a 5-foot sidewalk would negatively impact drainage for your property.
No other.
I understand. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but it's
I
my
know.
job to ask these questions.
I know it's not on my behalf, it's not an economic purpose, but all the lots between Central Boulevard and the expressway are 100 feet from the front of the street, and mine is 477 feet. So that was one other reason, but that's it.
And you do report that there is already pedestrian traffic there.
Like 4 people at the most daily, and usually are the people from the condominiums walking all the way to the 7-Eleven. But if I put the sidewalk, there's the Mejia and Rose Engineering's on the right side. They don't have a sidewalk, so they need to go either from the street or go inside their property on the parking space. But that's it.
Any other questions, gentlemen?
The obvious one. I think you said if it's a 4-foot sidewalk, starting at the property line, he can stop 1 foot short of the curb, and he's having to build a 4-foot rather than the 3-foot, and he doesn't need a variance for that
That is correct. He can build a 4-foot sidewalk adjacent to the property line.
without him.
Okay, I move to close public hearing.
Hang on, before we do that, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure that nobody else in the audience wanted to come up and speak for or against the issue. Very good, now we'll entertain that motion.
Make a motion to close the public hearing.
There is a motion to close the public hearing by Mr. Slackman, seconded by Mr. Kinch. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Public hearing is now closed. Motion one way or the other, gentlemen?
I'll make
Or
a
ladies?
motion to go along with the city's recommendation. There's no overriding hardship. As much as we like to help, as much as we can, we need overriding hardship, and I'm going to make a motion to deny the variance.
There is a motion to deny by Mr. Slackman, seconded by Mr. Vanderford. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. Motion carries.
But he is free to build a 4-foot sidewalk.
If it's adjacent to the property line, not adjacent to the curb. Mr. Ochoa?
Case number 2019-008-B, public hearing and action to consider a variance from Chapter 348, Article 5, Section 348-812, yards to allow a 2.9 feet side yard encroachment for an existing structure at Lot 32, Block 1, Isla de Palma Subdivision, located at 825 St. James Drive, as requested by Maria G. Luna and Julio C. Luna. Section 348-812 yards. In a G area district, yards shall be provided as follows. There should be a front yard of 25 feet. There should be a rear yard along the rear line of the lot of 3.5 feet and 13.5 feet when there is an alley. And there should be a side yard along each side line of the lot of 3.5 feet. This is the property in question. This is a portion of the survey of this property. As you can see on the right-hand side, excuse me, the existing house is already encroaching in the required setback. This is a photo of the building. Staff recommendation, the Planning and Development Services Department has no objections to the variance request to allow a 2.9 side yard encroachment of an existing structure. Applicant went through proper process and prior practices did not require surveys be submitted for setbacks. No further encroachment will occur, and it is only facade improvements.
Very good. Public hearing is now open. Any questions for Mr. Ochoa before we bring up?
Could you go back to the photos of the building, please? Could you describe on either one of these photos what the difference will be? You say well, I'll leave it at that. Using this photo, can you describe what's going to happen?
They're proposing improvements to the facade that is just going to be from one side to the other of the building, just on the front. But the issue is the encroachment that the building has already. As you can see on the right-hand side, it goes from 1.3 feet to 0.6 feet. So they're encroaching on the required
Already?
3.5, yes, sir.
But they're not going to do anything additional.
They're not increasing the footprint of the
Building.
well, it's just the facade.
Okay. If it goes up a half an inch, it goes up half an inch, right?
So it begs the question, if we deny the variance, what do they do with the building?
We're just denying the permit request they're doing right now for the facade.
Okay, thank you very much.
And it would remain a non-conforming structure?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Correct.
Anyone here to speak for or against this application?
The applicants are here.
They are?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Kinch, if I could ask if you can speak a little bit louder, sir.
Get closer to the mic.
Thank you.
Project.
Project.
Buenas tardes. Well, I was just.
Your name for the record,
Oh, I'm
please,
sorry, my name is Julio Luna. We were requesting to change just the front side of our house. When we did the other part, which is the garage, we closed it, but we didn't have the knowledge that we had to have 5 feet from our neighbors. But now that we're trying to do this, they're telling us we gotta go through this process. Hopefully we don't have no problems in improving our house. And I already talked to my neighbor. She said if you want to read a notice or something, I'm okay with that. It doesn't harm me or nothing. So that's all I have to say.
You're just changing the front of the
Yes,
house.
sir. Just the
The
I don't know if
eaves.
you have the photo. Yeah, just the side. Put some on the garage side. Put some bricks, and then where the door is, it's going to be the same, just a different door, and the porch is going to be like about 3 or 4 feet longer.
And Mr. Ochoa, you said when what's there now was first built, there were no violations at that time. They followed the proper processes?
Well, in our investigation, when we issued this permit, we didn't have the process to require a form survey before they pour. And we do now. We could have found this at that moment before they pour the foundation. At this time,
But that foundation was poured with a valid permit?
correct.
Okay.
Okay.
Other questions, gentlemen?
I've got no more questions.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak for or against this application?
Thank you.
I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
There is a motion by Mr. Kinch. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Vanderford. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Public hearing is now closed. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
There's a motion by Mr. Kinch to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Slackman. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion carries unanimously. Next case.
Case number 2019-009-V, public hearing and action to consider a variance from Chapter 348, Article 5, Section 348-750, lot width to allow a 53-foot wide residential lot at Lot 8, Block 11, Garden Park Subdivision located at 375 Garden Street, as requested by Maria G. De Leon and Eduardo De Leon. Section 348-750, lot width. In an A area district, the minimum average width of a lot shall be 50 feet for one family dwelling and 75 feet for a two-family dwelling. This is the property in question. This is a survey of the property. There's an existing building. Staff recommendation, the Plan and Development Services Department has no objection to the variance request to allow a 53 feet wide residential lot because the property exceeds the minimum lot size requirements.
Public hearing is now open. Mr. Ochoa, if this exceeds the minimum requirements already, why would a variance be required?
There are two requirements to allow a two-family dwelling. One is the size of the lot. Should be in an A area district at least 9,000 square feet and 75 feet wide,
Average,
the average.
and this meets that?
The front is 53 feet.
And the square footage?
It exceeds the 9,000. The right area is around 13,000, if I'm not mistaken.
Given the space that they have, if they were wanting to just build a second house on some of the vacant portion of the land right now, and it wasn't attached, so it wouldn't be a duplex, is that something that would be allowed right now in the ordinance?
It isn't. It
Okay.
has to be a duplex. It has to be attached either to the existing building, and if I'm not mistaken, the plans are to demo or move this house and build a completely new duplex.
The 53 feet, considering that this is a pie shape, where's the 50, is that an average, or is that the high or the low?
Is,
It's the front.
The front, based on the address?
Which is what, the bottom on this diagram?
It's the front portion of the entrance of the lot. So
Which
the
is the-
front width
on the bottom of what we're
property
looking at.
needs to be at least 75 feet to allow a duplex, or 50 feet to allow a single-family dwelling, or a single-family unit, or a single dwelling unit, I'm sorry. So they are at 53 feet right now, but they're requesting 75 to allow for the duplex.
Okay. In the bottom part of that diagram, there's a square. That represents the structure that's going to be going?
That's current.
It's existing.
That's existing.
that?
Is that the duplex we're talking about?
No, sir, this, that will be this.
Where's the duplex, if we come back, where's the duplex going to be?
As long as it meets the setbacks, the required setbacks anywhere in the lot.
Which means that it could be further back where there is 75 feet.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Is there anyone in the audience who'd like to speak for or against this application? Please come forward, state your name for the record.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Eduardo de Leon. The house is over 50 years old, very deteriorated, we would demolish that and try to build a duplex.
Very good.
The duplex will be at the back side.
State your name for the record also, ma'am.
Maria G. De Leon.
Thank you, Mrs. De Leon. And you're saying the duplex would be towards the back
Towards
portion of the
back.
property?
Yes.
Yeah, we would meet all,
You would meet all the setback
Yes,
requirements?
yes.
Yes.
Any questions for the applicants? Very good. And I can say, from my perspective, the fact that this is an irregularly shaped lot definitely works in your favor. And the fact that you exceed what would normally be required for minimum square footage also works in your favor. The one reservation I've gotten, this really isn't directed to you guys, I think this is probably more directed at staff. My only concern is, because of the way we worded this agenda item, neighbors who were sent mailers may not have known that what we're talking about is a duplex here. Are there any other duplexes on this block or in this neighborhood?
So I can speak to that. Notices were sent on this map right here on the screen. People within the 200-foot radius were sent a notice that this meeting would be happening. We had quite a few people call in asking, what does this notice mean? Is it going to affect me or my property? And I explained to every person who called that they had plans to demolish the existing structure and put in a duplex, and that they needed permission or the approval of this board in order to get that approved. And not a single person had a problem with that.
How many would you say you spoke to?
I'm gonna say maybe 6,
Okay.
more or
And there's
less.
how many in that 200-foot radius?
There's like 7, 10, maybe 12 or 13.
Okay.
Left and right.
Yes, and that's the only thing I'm wrestling with is for neighbors who got that letter that may think you're just working on a variance for the lot size. They don't know that you're building a duplex. I don't know if they've had ample opportunity to object, if they were to have any objections. I do like the fact that people have called in and staff explained it to them and there were no objections there. And I would think if any of them had any, they would have come forward today as well. Have you all spoken to any of your neighbors about what you all plan for the area?
well, just one that asked that she got the letter and we explained.
Okay.
She had no problem.
I have no more questions, gentlemen.
Make a motion to close the public hearing?
Second.
There's a motion to close the public hearing by Mr. Slackman, second by Mr. Kinch. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate your concern, and I think it's valid. I don't know that it's overriding.
I don't think it is, and I had double-checked with legal on that, and legally, we met the obligations that we have to notify, and the fact that people called in, that shows they received the letters and read the letters. So if legal's satisfied, I'm satisfied.
I believe sufficient notice was given.
Thank you.
I'll move that we approve this
If I may,
variance.
I want to make a quick note.
Sure.
We noticed that there might be a discrepancy with what was written in the application and what is shown on the survey as the front, the dimension. If you want to just keep in mind that, it's just the dimension.
So they don't have 53 right now? They've only got 39.45?
Correct.
So where did the 53 come in?
It was what was written on the application.
Okay.
I can tell you where the 53 came in. If you look at that on the survey, that is your degrees.
That's the
and-
bearing.
I'm sorry?
It's the bearing.
Right. If you look right above it, it says 71 degrees, 53.
Okay, I see what you're saying, yep. Okay, new question for council. Since the posted agenda item and letter said 53 feet and that's not the case, do you have an opinion?
I would say that more than likely what we should do is probably table the item and double check with all of the persons, because there was some concern in regard to some of the individuals. I don't believe it'll change in regard to what it is they want to do with the property or anything that's going to happen on the property, but just so that sufficient notice was given to all the individuals and for the agenda item itself, I believe it would be best if the item was just tabled and carried to the next time.
And Mr. and Mrs. De Leon, it wouldn't affect you guys too negatively if we tabled this for 30 days?
And-
I just don't understand if it was surveyed, I don't know, that's what we turned in.
The survey is correct. The dimension that was written in the application may have been this one, which is the bearing, when it is just almost 40 feet wide, the lot. The outcome is, it should be the same. It's just how it was.
Yeah, and the reason, Mr. De Leon, is that the way the agenda item is printed is we'd be giving you a variance to allow you to do this on a 53-foot wide lot, but you don't have a 53-foot wide lot. So it would be best to protect you and to do it properly if we bring it back for consideration with the proper dimension of 39.45 feet.
So that requirement of 39.45 feet isn't even enough for a single-family lot for the front width of the property, not
Right.
the width in general of the entire property, but just the front width of that property.
That's understood.
And the applicant would not have to pay additional fee, correct?
No, sir.
There was a motion to table by Mr. Vanderford. Is there a second?
No, the motion was to approve, but I will
Oh, I'm sorry.
withdraw that. I will withdraw that motion and move to table.
There is a motion to table by Mr. Vanderford. Is there a second? There is a second by Mr. Kinch. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. De Leon. We'll see you guys back here next month.
Case number 2019-010-B, public hearing and action to consider a variance from Chapter 348, Article 5, Section 348-750, lot width, to allow a 43.21 feet wide residential lot at Lot 4, Rosita Subdivision, located at 535 Rosita Street, as requested by Bolmaro Guzman. Section 348-750, lot width, in an A area district, the minimum average width of a lot shall be 50 feet for a one-family dwelling and 75 feet for a two-family dwelling. This is the property in question. This is a portion of this plat. As you can see, all lots are 43 feet wide. This is the existing building. Staff recommendation, the Plan Development Services Department has no objection to the variance request to allow a 43.21 feet wide residential lot because the property is a platted lot and both the subdivision ordinance and zoning ordinance are not harmonious and do not work together.
Public hearing is now open. My first question then, of course, would be, and it would not bear on this case, on how we vote on it, but is staff working on making recommendations to amend ordinance to allow and account for something like this?
There's upcoming changes and amendments to the zoning ordinance.
Very good.
I'd like you to explain what it means by subdivision ordinance and zoning ordinance are not working harmoniously. Could you restate that in a different way?
Well, the year this plat was recorded, according to the subdivision ordinance, this may have been an approved lot. But right now, the minimum in the zoning ordinance is 50 feet wide.
So the developer didn't do anything shady when the lots were sold, that we know of.
Not that we know.
And the adjacent lots are the same 43?
All of them are 43.
Thank you, sir.
Don't remember exactly the year this plat was recorded, but it was close to 100 years, so.
Any other questions from Mr. Ochoa? Anyone in the audience to speak for or against this application? I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second?
There is a motion by Mr. Vanderford, second by Mr. Slackman to close the public hearing. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve the variance.
There is a motion by Mr. Slackman, second by Mr. Kinch to oppose the variance as requested. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. I heard two ayes. What were the votes on this side? Yes, yes, okay. You guys are very soft-spoken. Motion carries unanimously. All right, that was item 10, correct?
Correct.
All right, before we begin on item 11, and for the record, I did have to file a notice of conflict on the next two cases. The applicant on the next two cases is AT&T, and I'm employed by AT&T, and I understand that they're represented here today by Baker Donaldson. I also have a cousin who's a shareholder with Baker Donaldson in Houston. So I will be turning the gavel over to our Vice Chairman, Mr. Slackman, and we will be bringing up an alternate to continue discussion.
So next on the rotation is Mr. Jose Hinojosa, and he will be taking your place.
I'll be in the corridor as soon as those two cases are done. Call me back in.
Oh, how touching.
And can we just note for the record that Mr. De Los Santos is not in the room during discussion, as that's part of our Chapter 38 conflict of interest?
So noted. Mr. Hinojosa, are you ready? You have had a
Yes.
chance to take a look at the paperwork
Yes,
on this case?
Thank you.
Mr. Ochoa, please.
Case number 2019-011-B, public hearing and action to consider a variance from Chapter 338, Article 2, Section 338-34, Development Standards to allow wireless communication facility antenna 150 feet in height at Lot 1, R8 League State, Partition Share 22, Espiritu Santo Grande, located at the corner of Fish Hatchery Road and Expressway 77, as requested by Ken McKay. Section 338-34, Development Standards, wireless communication facility height, including antenna array, shall not exceed 135 feet. The height restriction shall not apply to either temporary or permanent wireless communication facilities erected under contract by a public agency for use by police, fire, EMS, 911, or other similar government communications for the city.
Mr. Ochoa, just for the record, we're talking about one antenna
Yes, sir.
that is proposed that's going to be too high and too close to the setback. That's correct.
There's going to be two variances. The
Two
first
vari-
one is for the height.
Height, and the second is the
For the
proximity from the setback.
Correct.
Okay. To the extent that makes your job easier and anybody wants to testify, you can testify on both of them together. We're going to have separate votes. But if it makes it easier to talk about the height and the distance at the same time, you may do that.
I believe that's fine, since there has to be, I mean, if you guys agree on one and not the other, you would have to have two separate
We're
votes.
going to have two separate votes. But
That's
if it
fine.
makes it easier for the city or if anybody's testifying to link them together in their testimony, you may do that.
I will say that we do have two different statements for the staff recommendation.
Fine.
And so if Mr. Ochoa can go through them. The same information was submitted for both item number 6 and item number 7, the exact same documentation. So it's same information, but two different staff recommendations are being made with reasoning behind it.
Yes, and as I say, it's up to them, whatever works the easiest to communicate what you want to communicate. All right, let's open the public hearing.
This is the property in question at the corner of Fish Hatchery and Frontage Road on Expressway 77. This is a 200-foot radius. This is a survey of the property in question, a portion of. This right here will be the location, the compound. These are photos from the property. Staff recommendation, the Planning and Development Services Department does not support the variance request to allow a wireless communication facility antenna 150 feet in height because it does not comply with the height requirements as required by the Telecommunications Ordinance, Section 338-34D, or zoning ordinance, Section 348-928. Case number 2019-012-V, public hearing and action. To consider a variance from Chapter 338, Article 2, Section 338-34, Development Standards, to allow a 72.6 feet encroachment of a wireless communication facility antenna at Lot 1, RA League Estate Partition Shared 22, Espiritu Santo, Oran, located at the corner of Fish Hatchery Road and Expressway 77, as requested by Ken McKay. Section 338-34, Development Standards, a stealth wireless communication facility must be a minimum of 100 feet from any residential structure. A wireless communication facility must be a minimum of 200 feet from any residential structure. This is the property in question. This is 200 feet radius. This is the survey. This is the note stating that the setback is 27.4 feet from the nearest residential property line. Photos from the property. Staff recommendation, the Plan and Development Services Department does not support the variance request to allow a 72.6 feet encroachment of a wireless communication facility antenna because it does not comply with the distance requirements of the Telecommunications Ordinance, Section 338-34C. Additionally, the applicant has not submitted the construction drawings providing details of the antenna or safety provisions in case of structural failure.
Any questions for Mr. Ochoa?
Yes, sir. My question, I just noticed that safety provisions in case of structural failure. Is that the main reason why we do not allow that encroachment? Because if a tire falls, it could fall on a house or?
The setback is safety, one of the, what it's trying to cover there. The distance because of the height of the antenna, in case if it fails, it has structural failure. If it falls, there's next to a residential property, it may fall on top of a residence or the inhabitants of that lot.
We don't have any data on falling cell towers, do we? The distance from the nearest residential property, could you state that again?
According to this survey, a setback variant, is 27.4 feet away from the nearest residential property line.
If they put the antenna where they're proposing, it would be 27 feet.
That's what this survey is marking.
And if they put the antenna the 73 feet back to comply with the 250 feet, it would be 27 plus 73 or something along those lines to give you a greater distance from the antenna to the residential property? Could you tell that? In other words, I'm saying, let's assume they went back for the whole 250 feet that's required, which is correct, 250 feet?
It's 100
In this
feet.
case, it's 100 feet. It's 100 feet. That's
All
why
right.
they're requiring
Why-
the, excuse me?
No, go ahead.
That's why they're requesting the encroachment,
Of 72.6 feet.
72.6 feet.
And my question is, if they were back the full 100 required feet,
Uh-huh.
how far would they be from the nearest residential property?
100 feet.
Thank you. Would anybody like to come up and speak to this? Is anybody here today representing? Come right up. Anybody else?
I'm the applicant, I'm just waiting. Go ahead, if you go ahead.
Time has come. Come on up.
You go ahead.
Don't the objectors have to go first?
No. Not to my knowledge.
Good afternoon, or night.
State
Ken
your name,
McKay.
please, sir.
I'm sorry?
Please state your name and...
My name is Ken McKay. I represent an entity called New Singular Wireless PCS, which is an AT&T company. It is the actual applicant related to this request. I think that the most important thing, I'm going to start with what I think is the most important thing, which is why. Why are we suggesting that this tower you put here, when it is uncontested by us or anyone else, that it doesn't comport with two requirements of the city for WCF, wireless communication facilities. And so I think that's the most important thing. And the reasons are, I think, are unique. I'll first say that obviously it is AT&T's first choice, always, to find sites that comply with all the requirements. And in fact, and I note in the application that you may have said that on the same night that I presented this case to the Planning and Zoning Commission, I presented another one that did comply with everything. So it's obviously AT&T's first choice to try to find a site that complies with all the rules and all the ordinances. The bottom line here is that there is no location that's available in the city of Brownsville that can do what this tower needs to do. And what does it need to do? You'll see, if you haven't, and I can walk through it if you'd like, that this particular area is dramatically underserved in terms of wireless signal. In fact, I've been out there several times using devices with two different providers, and neither one of them was I able to get a consistent signal. And this is important for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is 911 first responder calls. I will say that the problem with it, and I will go through this in some detail, is that because we are basically, the area that's underserved is basically residential. And the problem with doing that is in order to put a facility, a wireless communications tower, that serves a residential areas, you have to put it in a residential area. In order to do that. And so that's the problem that we have. I will tell you, there is no alternative. There is no other source. And we looked high and low as we do. This is our business to do this. This is further compelling for another reason, which is that although the areas north and south of this area, which have towers, are at maximum capacity. So what that means is that even though there are facilities there that serve the area, we project, and this is a fairly amazing stat, that growth in terms of demand for wireless signal is at a rate of 42% per year. So what this tower would allow AT&T to do is not only serve an area that's underserved, in which we can't get a consistent signal, but it will offload some of the demand on both the north and south areas that are at capacity now. There is no other site that allows us to do that. This particular site we thought, was one of the least egregious because it abuts basically a highway. So you're not in the middle of a residential area, you're at the edge, in which on the other side you have an interstate. And so it is the ability to affect the least number of people that you can affect. And obviously, I will say again, which I've said twice already, it is always our first choice to find a location that will work, that will serve and provide a communication services that complies with all these requirements. I will say that the City of Brownsville's spacing requirement, I think they've called it setback here, it's not setback, it's spacing requirement, is more aggressive than pretty much any city that I've ever dealt with. I will say that that spacing requirement is, in my experience, unique. I don't know why that is, but I will say this, and it pertains to a question that you asked, which is what happens if it falls over? The bottom line is that the modern cell tower is now designed to collapse on itself. So in the event something happens, and that it is highly unforeseeable that would happen, it collapses on itself. You no longer have a situation where these tump over. That's the way they're engineered if that happens. So I don't know when this ordinance would pass, and I don't even know what the rationale for this ordinance is, but I don't think the concern about falling over on a structure really exists anymore. At least that's been my experience, and that's my experience of why other jurisdictions have reduced at least the spacing requirement, which again is different from the idea of you need to be X amount of distance from a property line. It's you need to be X amount of distance from an existing structure. I will say that another thing that we felt was compelling that would allow a variance with regard to the spacing, and I know I'm jumping around a little bit, is that if we've seen the picture, you can put it up again, you will see there's an existing utility easement across the back of it. So you're talking about, and from the standpoint of, I think of it as this way, that as a landowner, I would think of the first easement to be the one that particularly has, affects you the most. Once you've got that issue in, and these are actual strong wires across the property, then you've already got that present on the property. For us, it's a more compelling argument because this is not a green space. This is something that already exists on the property. And what we know we know this from studies that have been done is that, I mean, I've had this experience myself. When I built a house and there was they put a telephone pole right next to it after I built a house, I was pretty upset about it because every time I drove in, I saw the telephone pole. 3 years into the thing, I never noticed the telephone pole anymore. And the experience has been that that's the way it is with the WCF as well. There are some other things that we believe make this compelling from a location standpoint. We're asking for 2 variances on 2 different requirements, but the reasons are the same, pretty much. And that is the uniqueness of the demand, the uniqueness of the location, and the uniqueness of the need of the community. I will say that this site was specifically chosen by Border Patrol. It will contain equipment on it, which I don't even have security clearance to know what it is, which will facilitate the immigration program of the Border Patrol. And this location has been chosen specifically by the Border Patrol to do that. If approved, this will also function as part of FirstNet, which historically has been important. That's the First Responder Network Authority. That is the separate, if you're not familiar with that is the separate network dedicated solely to first responders. So fire, ambulance, medical services, police, they operate on their own network that has been created, and that this tower will house their equipment for that. So it will not only increase the ability of someone to dial 911, it'll increase the ability of the first responders to communicate with each other in this area. In addition, this site, if approved, will have 5 additional LTE carriers. That is, in addition to the Border Patrol, in addition to FirstNet, 5 other LTE carriers will be co-located on this facility, which means, in words that in my simple mind had, that's a fewer number of towers that need to be built. So one of the reasons why we think this is a really good idea is because we're not the only ones. AT&T is not the only one that has signal deficiency in this area. We know that there's going to be other people who need this because when it became known that we're going to do it, everybody jumped on the bandwagon. It will have the ability to serve this entire community with 5 other LTE carriers, which would reduce the number of tower applications we think we're going to have in that area. Okay. Let me talk just a moment about the height, specifically the height issue. The height restriction related to the WCF in Brownsville under 338-34D is 135 feet with the antenna. We are proposing 150 feet. I will tell you that as I walk by, as I walk by an antenna, I cannot tell the difference between 135 and 150 feet. And I think that that's the case with most people. I will say that as technology has evolved over the last 5 to 7 years, the height required for the network to function properly on most networks is 150 feet. So what we typically do is we try to find a site that has a higher elevation. So if we just could find a site that was 15 feet higher in elevation, then we wouldn't be asking for a variance for height. But because this is a unique site, because it's the only one that works, and because it has a lower elevation, then we need a higher antenna. To describe things that are more sophisticated than I understand, the physics of the network say that we can neither connect with the network as well, nor provide the coverage area at 135 that we can do at 150. So in other words, to facilitate that happening, we need to have 150 feet, given the elevation of this site. And I set in there, we can walk through them, but I set in the exhibits to our application the before and after, which shows not only the difference in, and that's exhibit G and H, I believe, but it also, exhibit I is a certification from the FAA saying that the height that we propose is not something that for which they will require any reporting or notice in connection with their flight path. The other thing I will note with regard to height is something that Mr. Ochoa, I said that right, sorry, noted, is that there is a specific exception to the height requirement for first responder, for towers dedicated to or contracted for first responder use. I'm not contending that we comply with that, we don't. But what I'm saying is we have special equipment that we're going to put on for FirstNet, which is solely dedicated, this equipment is solely dedicated for first responder use. So I would say just as a lawyer, what I would say is the same sort of policy arguments that would justify that exception, I think is an argument in favor of granting this variance because it does serve the same purpose as the exception to the height rule that's embedded into the Brownsville statute. With regard to spacing, I've covered most of the points that I wanted to cover. To answer your question specifically about the location on the lot, the reason why there's a location on the lot and the property owner is here is this is the only place that we're allowed to put it. I think it's that simple, and I'll let the property owner speak for himself if he wants to. But the fact of the matter is it's a relatively small tract. There's not a lot of flexibility. I think that given some of the other dynamics of the situation, this does make the most sense. Plus, I mean, to me, it just underscores the point that we have had to do what we've had to do to make this work because there's just no other option for us. There's just no other choice. And as we are trying to deal with the increasing demand that this presents, especially here in a part of the city that is dramatically underserved, this is, we think, one of the least obtrusive places that we can put it, albeit not in compliance with, strict in compliance with these two requirements. I will say that I made the point about the existing easement, the utility, and the existence of the wires next to with this location. But there's nothing about our location that this is proposed to be that would hamper or inhibit the use of the residential property that abuts it from the standpoint of its legally permissible uses. There are some other things I can go over, but those are the main points. I will say, one final point I'll say is that when we were presented in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission, and by the way, the Planning and Zoning Commission deferred to this group, and if we are granted these variances tonight, then I will be back in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission tomorrow. There were some neighbors who appeared and had some concern. They just expressed some concerns. Immediately after that hearing, I went in the hall and approached them and gave them my contact information because I don't know, I think that and this is just my understanding from listening to them, is that they had questions about things such as the RF signal and impact on that, about aesthetics, about property value. And so I gave them my contact information. I said, we have all this information. We have all this research on all sides. And I told them that if they wanted that information, I'd be happy to either give it to them or put them in contact with the department at AT&T that handles that. That was a month ago, and no one has contacted me. No one's contacted AT&T to my knowledge. So again, I'm happy to address all those questions, but no one approached me or asked me those questions in the intervening period of time. So, I mean, I get paid by the hour. I can keep talking, but
We don't. Mr. Ochoa, this might not be fair, but because we've read your statements, we've received your statements, in light of the testimony that you've heard and all the positive aspects that Mr. McKay mentioned, does the city have any altered feeling in terms of your recommendation based on what you've heard?
If I may, so the ordinance itself has a requirement of 100 feet if the antenna were 135 feet. Because this antenna is 150 feet, that setback, it wouldn't work for it, right? So we're asking, or the ordinance states 100 feet if it were the regular 135-foot height of an antenna. Also, for the amount of space that we have, the city of Brownsville recently had like a study done with planners, and it's something that has been discussed. We have a lot of agricultural land, so there is a lot of space. Actually, there's a neighboring lot right next to the proposed location that is for sale. And our main concern is that we cannot sacrifice citizen safety for higher reception areas.
May I respond to that?
If it's 150 feet, it's 100 feet.
No,
It's 135 feet,
The
it's 100
ordinance
feet.
requires an antenna to be 135 feet high. Their proposed antenna is 150 feet. If it were 135 feet, that's when the ordinance says 100 feet.
Okay. Yes, please do, sir.
2 points here. One is because a lot is for sale does not mean the property owner is willing to allow us to lease it to put a cell tower on it. I mean, we don't have the ability to go to someone and say, we're putting it on your property and you don't have a choice. We can't do that. So that's the problem. That's the problem on that. The other thing related to safety, and this is the kind of thing that gets my hackles up. There's been absolutely no showing that there's any safety issue. Absolutely no evidence to support that. We can demonstrate to you, I think the statement about us not providing the information about the tower, the falling tower schematics is incorrect. This tower will be designed to collapse on itself. I don't even know what the reason is in 2019 for the spacing requirement. I don't know what it is. Because, again, in my experience, that's been unusual from the standpoint of ordinances that have been passed in the last 3 to 4 years. So the idea that there is some safety-related issue, I will say, is absolutely unsupported by any evidence that I know.
Mr. McKay, in the event that one variance was approved and the other was not, what would happen?
Well, then we have to have them both.
Okay, fair enough. Any
we-
questions for Mr. McKay?
Can we
Yeah,
note
yes.
that Mr. Kinch needs to leave,
Oh, okay.
and we would need to have an alternate take his
Okay.
place?
I apologize to everyone here. We're going to take a 60-second break. Can you invite one of the alternates?
Yes, Ms. Michelle Garcia is the next alternate on the rotation. So just everyone is clear, Ms. Garcia has been here for the entire meeting. She is aware of all of the comments that have been made, and she will be taking Mr. Kinch's place. All of the documentation that was submitted by any of the applicants today was provided to all of the board members, including the alternates, a week before the meeting.
And we apologize for bringing in a new commissioner. Mr. Kinch is a deacon, and he has prior commitments. Any questions for Mr.
Yes, I
McKay?
do have a couple of questions. Now, when I brought up the issue about safety, and yes, I do have like a little engineering background, but
Right.
not that much in it. But I know they construct them to collapse on itself.
Right.
but we are in Brownsville, Texas, where we have hurricanes. And if a structure's going to fall, it's not going to fall on itself when the winds are 150 miles an hour. It's going to go whatever direction the wind is blowing, and that's my concern but I guess the important concern that I have is when Mr. Ochoa had indicated on his slide that you had not provided the schematics. Is that correct?
Correct, the documentation that Mr. McKay is mentioning, if we can have that, if this board will be willing to table it until we receive that information so we can have it in hand. That
Well,
proves that the antenna will-
that's what I was asking, because, I mean, I don't think well, at least I can speak for myself. Safety is the number one priority. Now, safety is twofold. Yours, as you're proposing for 9/11, for 911 calls, and also for the Border Patrol's systems that they're going to put up on it. That's one part of the safety. The other part of the safety are for the residents in that neighborhood.
Of course.
And without the proper documentation for our planners to really evaluate, and for our board here to evaluate, I don't think it's feasible to give a
If I may as well, we don't have also documentation supporting that is going to be used for official purposes as well. As Mr. McKay mentions, we don't have that documentation also.
So, 2 points here. One is, we did get that information. I just don't know whether they've noted it. But we produced all the construction drawings, every single construction drawing, which is way more than's required. The second thing I'll say, in all due fairness, is that since I submitted that, and by the way, the staff has been great to work with, they've been cooperative, they've been helpful. But I've asked them twice, since I submitted this, whether we gave them everything they needed, and twice they've said yes. For them to show up at a hearing and say for the first time in a slide that we didn't give them something, that's not fair play. That is not fair play, especially when I will tell you that I believe what they're asking for is in the documents I gave. I just don't think that's fair play.
Can you name the exhibit that it's in?
It's in the CD. It's in the construction drawings that we sent, both in hard copy and in
So
electronic.
there is documentation stating that this property and this antenna will be used, or will be used to house for government agencies?
Yes,
'Cause
and it's in the application. It's in the application, but that's not a requirement for the variance.
No, I'm just saying that is there backup documentation to support that statement?
Sure, but that's not a requirement for the variance.
No, sir, no, but if you wanted to submit that, then that way we can go ahead and review
I can,
that.
but my point here is that there's no justification for delay. We've been delayed already a month. We're really worried about the fact that we've got this incredible, dramatic, underserved area in which any day now we can have a drop 911 call. And we waited a month. We've done what we've been asked to do. We were able to put it on the schedule fortuitously where we have a Planning and Zoning Commission meeting tomorrow. And to be candid with you, I don't think this is fair when we've done everything that we can do to get this to comply with the requirements. And so the idea that we would be put off for another month when we've got this real concern about safety, I don't think that I just don't think that's fair play. When we've done everything we know to do to get this done, and which I've asked twice whether or not we gave them everything they needed, and both times they said yes. So to be honest with you, I don't know exactly how entitled they should. And as a lawyer, I would say they'd be stopped from saying this. Once I've asked them, and once I've asked them again, them showing up now and saying, "Oh, you didn't do this," especially since the last thing's not even required for the variance. To me, that's just not fair.
So I will speak to that. All of the documentation that is required to present to the Board of Adjustment was submitted. So when we answer the question whether all of the documentation, everything that we need was submitted, surveys, drawings, letters of support, anything else that is listed on the application, all of that information was submitted.
So you want to state again what's missing? So we understand?
No, we're just saying that even though it was not listed on the application, the safety requirements or safety provisions that we would like to see, that's not on the application. Required documentation on the application, all of that was submitted. So when the applicant has asked, do you have everything else that I need? And I reviewed all the documentation and I spoke with them, yes, all of that was submitted.
Well, maybe I misunderstood. If I did, I apologize. But if what she's saying is she would like for me to supplement that information for their edification, that's fine. I'm happy to do that tomorrow or the next day as soon as I get my hands on it. But if she's saying she wants to use that as a basis to defer the decision on that I think is not right.
All right, the decision whether it's to be deferred or not is going to be by this board.
I get
Number one.
that.
Number two, keep in mind, Ms. Leal and Mr. Ochoa, you're communicating to us that part of the reason you're recommending that we do not approve this variance is because you're missing certain documents. If I've misstated that, correct me, but that weighs on our minds, and the applicant's not agreeing with you there. So that's an important point tonight. Mr. McKay, can I go on to the next witness?
Sure.
But before you go,
Go
I've
ahead.
got a question. You mentioned leasing the property.
Right.
When, I don't know how long the lease is or what the serviceable use is of this tower, but when you're done with it, does AT&T remove the tower?
Typically, these are really long-term situations. As a practical matter, what typically happens is that we renegotiate an extension of lease because once you have the network formed,
It just sounded very odd that, say it's a 25-year lease,
Well-
at the end of 25 years, no, we just walk away.
But it's such a long-term lease that I think in most accountants would say it's basically acquiring the property. But it's a very small part. You saw the small square that it is along with an access road. So, but I mean, it's a good question. Typically what we're going to see happen is at some point in the process, technology is going to change.
Right.
And they're going to come in and do something like upgrade it, change it, and then by that time we'll probably have a new ordinances to deal with. But that's what we do, and in fact, we're doing that now. The bottom line is, this is a network, and so if we it's kind of like the game where you pull a piece out. You pull a piece out, then the whole that causes a problem for the rest of the network. And there's the ability to have some redundancy. We need to have redundancy to do this, but as a practical matter, we believe that our expectation, although it's not part of the current agreement, is that this tower or something like this tower will always be at this location.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, I just have one more. I was going to ask Ms. Leal, is it possible to go back to the staff recommendation slide?
For which item?
I guess the last.
The last.
Oh, wait, yeah. See, that right there, and I'm looking through the package the packet I have, it does not have that last paragraph saying additionally, the applicant has not submitted the construction drawings.
Yes.
That by reading this information right here, I was just, looking at, okay, everything, talking about the height and the distance and all, I thought that's what we're going to be having a discussion on.
Without a doubt.
But when I saw that on the slide, I get a little concerned because I thought as one of the driving forces of this board is also for the safety of the people. And when I see that little statement down there, safety provisions in the case of structural failure.
Mr. Hinos's point is very well taken. The board came in today not knowing that, because it's not in the information you sent to us. And our board may or may not decide to take that last sentence into consideration. Did any other questions for Mr. McKay?
There's just one more point. There's Exhibit J to my submission is complete construction drawings. Complete construction drawings. Every drawing that exists that's required by federal and state government and local government is in Exhibit J, okay? And it does include this last thing. And finally, I'll say the third point is that there is no requirement in the Brownsville ordinance that says you have to produce this.
That says what?
That says you have to submit this for a variance. We've submitted it, even though it's not required, and they're saying, okay, this is not, they haven't identified a specific place for it. It's not required in the ordinance.
Site plan.
I mean,
Any other questions?
I have the attachment that the exhibit that you're talking about.
They're complete construction drawings. I mean, they're, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. I'm going to invite up the next, I'm going to invite up the next witness.
Yeah, that's,
I would like to bring up all the houses and the other fence and the pictures? Yeah, they're all pictures, yeah.
Sir?
I'll go
Okay,
there.
sir,
Yeah,
sir,
sorry, yes,
sta-
yes,
speak
sorry,
into the microphone
sorry.
and state your name, please.
Yes, my name is Abraham Galonsky, and I'm part owner of that property.
Okay, very good.
Can you please move it when you show the fence on the other side where the houses are, okay? Like this, those are sheds, they are not houses. The houses are farther in. This building and those buildings, those are not houses. This is a house. Now, I don't think the 27 feet is from here to here. This is a house. Those are the houses. And the thing it's gonna build right here. This is a drainage or an old recycle bed. This is the highway, and this is frontage. So there's really nothing on this side of the property at all. This here, I don't know if it's an old recycle bed or a drainage ditch. So if you're gonna count from where they're gonna put this building here to the first house, I'm sure, I don't know how the distance is, but it's way over 100 feet.
Thank you. And so you're suggesting that this antenna would not be a problem? Is that what you're telling us?
Yes, because there's, like I say, there's nothing here, and there's nothing here.
Are you a resident in the area, sir?
No, I'm not the resident.
Okay.
I'm the owner of the land. But I've been through.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I drive through there all the time, and I know exactly what it is. And if it's such a big deal, we can even probably move it a few feet that way.
Thank you. Any questions for the witness?
I have a question. Ms. Leal, all the residents in the 200 area were notified of this application, and
Yes.
anyone call in?
Yes. Yeah, we actually have, I believe, a few people here from the neighborhood. We did send out, this is the buffer. So any property, even if it's just a tiny corner that lies within the 200-foot radius, gets a notice. And we did have people call in. We had people ask questions, and we have some public present who would like to speak on the item.
Thank you, sir. Okay, I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing. Is there anybody else in the audience? I apologize. Come on up.
There's still some people that want to
Yeah.
talk.
It's wonderful.
I think that whole group back there.
Okay, that's great.
Over there.
Both of you, please state your name for the record, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Graciela Villarreal,
My name is Ricardo Villarreal.
and we do live in the neighborhood right behind where they're considering to install the antenna. It is a small neighborhood. They're acre lots, and I did provided you all with a list of petitions. And I believe we got 20.57 results based on those petitions that people signed against the tower. Okay?
20 names?
It's the results, it states here it's a 20.57%. Now, it's 14 people out of 18 that signed the petition. And the other ones, it's because they weren't home at that time that we were collecting signatures. Okay. Again, River Creek Subdivision is a private family-owned neighborhood. Imagine what it's like for people who purchase or build their dream home, only later to have an unwanted cell phone or cell tower installed around the neighborhood, or worse yet, behind some of the people's backyard. Excuse me, a home is the biggest investment people make in their lifetime. Therefore, it is very important to protect it very carefully. Based on my research, realtors state that cell towers reduce the values of properties which are in close proximity to the tower. It's also more difficult to sell a home when the time comes. It's not only an eyesore issue, but also health issues for many. I don't think I need to move on to the standards since they went over it, but I do want to state that there's an encroachment, okay? And we have to take that into consideration. It might not affect me in that aspect, but it does affect other people that live right behind it. Mr. Golowski states that there's 2 sheds. Yes, it's true. But there's also houses right behind where this tower is going to be installed. It is encroaching other residents' property line. Imagine you all going out on a vacation, a short vacation trip. When you come back, you find out that your new neighbor, built a fence inside your property line. I don't see this fair, okay? I ask that you all take this into consideration for the people that live right there on that property line. It is very close. Also, the requirements on the the height, okay? They do not meet the requirements. Although it states that the height restriction shall not apply to WCFs erected under contract by public agency, well, it is my understanding that Border Patrol, in this case, has their own antennas, just like any other communities or agencies, okay? So I have a list also that I took the time to do a little bit of research, and we already have 15 antennas within a 10-mile radius, okay? And the Verizon is within half a mile from where we're at or we live. Verizon too could work something out with Border Patrol. Why does it have to be them? Why install a cell tower if they don't meet the requirements just because it's a unique space, like Mr. Salinas stated on the previous meeting? It might be a unique space, but not for this purpose. Do you have anything to say?
No, I only have to say is, imagine you guys living right where we at. We spent a lot of money buying that acreage. We spent a lot of money developing our home,
Investment.
the investment we put into it. Now the day comes that we do get older, we want to sell. It's not going to affect AT&T, it's not going to affect you guys, it's going to affect us. So that's why we're here asking you to vote against this. It's not just your distance and the height and everything else. It's a little bit more than that. To me, AT&T is just money, which is fine. Everybody's got entitled to make money, but please take it into consideration.
how would you feel to wake up in the morning, open the door, there's a big old antenna? How me no way? But whatever they do, I don't live close to them, you know? So taking into consideration that what we're fighting for, it's not just for us, it's for the community. They're saying that it's gonna give better communications. Well, give better communication to AT&T customers. But I don't see them giving better communication to emergency, border patrol, EMS, or anybody else, because they all have their own private antennas. Other than that, I really don't have anything else to say.
I'd like to add, there's 5 locations that are on sale, available. They're right next to that resaca or canal, drainage, whatever it is. Right next to it, there's 2 trucking companies, different trucking companies. They can talk to the owners. I'm sure AT&T has enough money to purchase the property. One of them is 5 acres. They got enough space. And it's listed for a little bit over $5 million. I'm sure they can afford this. Okay? The next one, I wouldn't know. I know there's another one, a good location right behind John Deere. There's a big sign, property for sale. Okay? Next to the 2 trucking companies, there's also a sign that it's for sale, and there's maybe like an acre or so. That's a house in that area. Okay? Right across the street, the Children's Hospital, there's the resaca. Next to the resaca, there's an acre as well available for sale. Why just there when they don't meet the requirements? Keep that into consideration. Thank you.
Any questions?
I do. Well, how many, that survey that you did, how many people did you send?
The protest?
Petition?
Yeah.
The petition, it was 14 out of 18.
14 out of 18?
Yes.
It's a small private neighborhood, sir, and it's all acreage lots.
Yeah.
And they all, everybody has invested heavily into their properties.
But I mean, the 14 said.
And the 14 that signed were there at their home when we went to pick up the petitions, and the other weren't not. And we weren't able to get a hold of them, even though it's a small community, we don't know them all. They all have private lives, they all have their own personal life living. So we weren't able to get a hold of them.
If I can add to that,
Okay.
to the percentage that she is stating about, or talking about, I'm sorry. For planning and zoning commission cases, they do the same notification process within that 200-foot radius. If more than 20% of the people notified respond or are against it, it is considered a petitioned or a protested case. And so that is the percentage that she is saying. They passed over it. So that means that the majority of the people that were notified are against the item.
Okay.
Based on her testimony?
No, that information was submitted to our zoning administrator, Ms. Francesca Linder, and Francesca is the one who gave the calculation.
So you're telling us now that this is something called a protested case, and what does that mean?
That
Not
is
for us.
not for us. So that, I'm just letting you know that for the Planning and Zoning Commission,
Okay.
which this item was presented to, they followed the same notification process. The same properties within that 200-foot radius were notified. More than 20% of the people notified have responded against the case, and so that qualifies this item for P&Z only as a protested item. So that is the percentage that she is giving you. They have surpassed that. What that means is that the majority of the people who were notified are against the item or have written and signed that petition.
Thank you.
That does not affect the BOA, the Board of Adjustment. That is for P&Z, but that is something that we are letting you know.
Thank you for letting us know. Any other questions for these people testifying? Before we invite you back, thank you very much. Is there anybody else who would like to speak, who has not spoken yet?
Good evening. My name is Iris Perales, and this is my mother.
Rosalinda Perales.
And we would be the most affected neighbors in this project that we're hoping not to pass. Our home is the one that's right there. I can show you, right behind that longer line. We're right here. There is a small shed that my mom has right next to the red line. But it is her property, and I'm thinking if she wants to put anything there, swings, that would be a safety issue. And not only for her, of course, being my mother, I'm concerned about her safety. But it is a highly trafficked area. The frontage access road is right there on the other side, on the opposite side. So if anything were to happen, if this antenna were to fall, either way, it can hurt anybody. There is also, the flea market is very close, maybe 1/4 of a mile away. So some people walk to the bus stop through there. There's bikers sometimes. There is no sidewalk. It's not safe already enough. But with this, it's a major safety issue. Another thing, we don't know exactly if it would operate on noise, or we did do some research with the neighbors. We've been talking about it and kind of doing a little bit of research on our own. But if it doesn't have maintenance, these antennas regularly, they don't meet a requirement. So that would mean that people would have to come to work on them often, maybe by climbing and overseeing the fence, and just, it's an invasion of privacy also. And of course, the encroachment is also, if it would pass into her land, then that's just something it's her property. I feel like that shouldn't even be allowed at all if it's cutting into her land.
Pues que tenemos muchas antenas a nuestro alrededor. Sabemos de lo perjudicial que es para la salud, ¿verdad? Yo no tengo buena condición de salud y con eso pues va a empeorar más rápido. La privacidad, igual, ¿verdad? La propiedad va a perder valor. ¿Sí? Entonces yo no estoy de acuerdo en que pongan esta antena ahí, porque a mí en lo personal me perjudica bastante.
Any questions for these witnesses?
And just one last thing that I wanted to add is that it is an established neighborhood. Everybody went, we were one of the first homes to be built there, maybe about 20 years ago. They're nice sized acre lots, very private, very cozy, warm neighborhood. But everybody that went into that neighborhood knew the conditions and what it didn't have, kind of isolated, nice, quiet, and then they decided to purchase. Now that they want to add something into it, it would kind of change a lot of people's minds. But at the same time, it wouldn't be just as easy. Nobody wants to just leave their home because of an antenna. So we just asked consideration. It's a residence versus a business.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there anybody else in the audience who has not spoken who would like to speak? If there's anybody in the audience who would like to speak a second time, I'm just going to ask that you be succinct on your second appearance.
Four-foot points. I don't know what encroachment they're referring to. There's no encroachment. That's not an issue. With regard to the property value issue, I don't know what they reference, what the evidence in support of that. I am aware that the Federal Telecommunications Act of 1996.
Sir, I apologize.
Yeah.
Considering the seriousness of this, I'm getting indications from the audience that they cannot hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I want everybody to hear you.
I'm rarely accused of
It's
being
not-
too soft-spoken.
It's not your fault. The microphone is not the best at that location. If you could lean into the microphone, we'd greatly appreciate it.
Yep.
Again, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Usually people tell me to tone it down rather than be louder, but I appreciate it.
Understood.
The Federal Telecommunications Act of 1996, 42 USC 332 7B4, requires, and a case that has supported that in the Fifth Circuit. So the Fifth Circuit, for the non-lawyers, is the federal appeals court that governs all the state of Texas, among some other states. As said in the case U.S. Cellular versus City of Wichita Falls in 2004, that generalized concerns about property values do not constitute substantial evidence. The reason why it said that was the Federal Telecommunications Act of 1996 said a jurisdiction cannot deny an application for a cell tower without substantial evidence of any of the arguments that are being made. And we have seen no evidence, I've heard no evidence about the property values, and I'll address the others in a minute. What I do know is that in 1998 in Richmond, Virginia, in 2001 in Maryland, in 2005 in Newcastle County, Delaware, and in 2013 in Chatham County, North Carolina, studies were performed that found that there is no effect on property value by the location of a cell tower in the area. And a law review article was published to the effect that cell phone towers do not affect property values. Whether or not that is deemed credible, the fact of the matter is the Federal Telecommunications Act of 1996 says without substantial evidence, no application for a cell tower can be denied based upon a concern about property value without substantial evidence supporting that. With regard to aesthetics, which is a similar issue, that is the aesthetics, and this pertains to property values too, I will cite to another case which is, and there's been an express finding that petitions that are submitted in opposition to applications for cell towers do not meet the standard of substantial evidence on their own. They must have, each person must set forth the reason, the explanation, the basis for its opposition to the cell tower as opposed to some generalized general objection. And so that's, that case is Preferred Citus LLC 296 F3rd 1210. So the Federal Telecommunications Act precludes a denial based upon, without some evidence of what we're seeing, some generalized concern. Finally, I don't know whether any of that spilled over to, I mean, I heard references to radio frequencies, and so I don't know if the argument was being made about health effects, but this same act precludes denial of an application based upon allegations of health effects. American Cancer Society has issued a publication saying that it does not caused by cancer. 3 other federal governmental agencies have determined that it is not considered cancer-causing exposure, and the principal reason is that it's so high. That the antennas, although they give off RF waves, they're 150 feet high, and so while it is theoretically possible that if you stood in front of this next to it for an extended period of time, there could be some exposure, they are so high that it's by the time that it reaches the ground, it does not expose anyone to a level that would cause any health concern. So anyway, I just needed to have that on the record in case we have to go another location after this. So
We appreciate it, Mr. McKay. Let me just share something with you.
yes, sir.
This board is not considering approving or denying an application. Our job is to determine whether we should give you a variance, or 2 in this case, to violate current city ordinances. And to that extent, we're going to base that on hardships and other reasons. And you've stated many, many good reasons, as well as hardships associated with having to do your job and AT&T having to do their job. But that's what we're considering here. Why or if we should allow you to have a greater freedom around ordinances than the average company or citizen. Just again, as you say, for the record, sir.
You know, and I appreciate that, and I didn't mean to imply otherwise. However, I'm trying to do my job, and we know that cases have been overturned because someone didn't stand up and say what I just said. And so I didn't mean anything by it, didn't to suggest otherwise, but I need to do that.
Before you step down.
Yes, sir.
Something that was brought up by the citizens was a noise issue. Do you have information concerning what noise might be produced?
Other than to say that it is in compliance with every federal and state local regulation. The bottom line is that, again, because of the height of this antenna, the small amount of noise that is disseminated from it dissipates by the time that it reaches the ground. And so that's the real, another advantage to being a little bit higher is that it dissipates quicker, it dissipates before it reaches the ground, but there's no evidence. In fact, I think there were specific findings by the federal government that this is, I think, 1/100th of the requirement, of a noise requirement to create some sort of nuisance or considered some other issue from a standpoint of noise.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. In all fairness, sir, did you want to, okay. Does anybody else wish to?
I will state that staff is simply voicing safety concerns, and that it is up to the Board of Adjustment to verify if this is a hardship, or see if this constitutes a hardship or not.
I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
You have two more people that would like to re-speak.
I didn't see a hand. I apologize. I didn't see a hand. This must be a foggy room. I'm missing the hands then. Okay, on second speakers, again, I'm asking for you to be succinct. Go right ahead.
Well, I just want to say this, I want to mention this, is that when we bought our property over a decade ago, it was a very nice private section of Brownsville. And I know it's Brownsville growing and everybody needs progress, and I'm all for it. But one thing that I want to mention is that we have a wildlife refuge right behind our property, or behind the subdivision. And there's very beautiful birds. It's wildlife. It's just a very nice, quiet neighborhood. And like I said, mentioned earlier, I don't know if it hums or what this antenna does. It might not affect us, but I think birds and wildlife have better sense than we do, as far as hearing and, whatever it's an animal.
Right.
And the reason why we bought that property, and we mentioned that we bought it at a very high price back in those days, was the intention that we knew that Brownsville was growing, and, we knew it was an investment. And everybody's trying to make an investment to better their lives further down the road. And for us, being such a small neighborhood, we still are very against this. We oppose this, not only for money value, but its safety value. They're not meeting the requirements. We can drag this on forever and ever. We're just asking you guys to oppose this. It's nothing out of the ordinary. They can go find another little place somewhere else. Brownsville's a very big community that they can go find somewhere else. Somewhere there's no homes, wildlife, somewhere they can go put that antenna somewhere else. Like my wife mentioned, there are plenty of other properties around. Across, if you want to look at the pictures, if you look across that drainage ditch, there are here, all this area, and there's some more on this side, and we can mention it, keep going on and on. Why they're so
Persistent.
specific for this area here. The only thing that I can conclude in my head is money. Somebody's gonna make money, which I have no issues with, but not for this antenna. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
I'd like to add, every time I drive or, through there, this particular place, I don't know why, I always thought to myself and asked myself, I wonder who the owner is. It'd be nice if they donate this place to the city, this piece of land, with the intention that sooner or later, they close the railroad track, so they can do the bike trails back there. And then all they have to do is, build a small park or a station for bikers. that I always ask myself, who's the owner? I wonder if they're willing to donate this to the city of Brownsville. Let's keep Brownsville beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else have anything to contribute? I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay.
Do you want to close public comment on both cases, or do you want to?
Yeah, all right, let's do them separately. 11, we just did on 012, let's close the, good idea, let's close the public hearing separately for 012. I'll accept the motion.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, both cases, public hearing is closed. Yes, sir. Okay. Before asking for a motion on yea and nay on this particular, this is a complicated cases. We've heard a lot of public hearing tonight. I'm going to open it up to the board. If you'd like to have some discussion before we make a motion, I think that would be appropriate, because I'm sure there's a lot of things going through everybody's mind. So if any board member would like to share with the board what they're thinking, I think it would be very worthwhile on either case.
May I start?
Please.
Yes, it sounds very complicated. However, it states why we're here is because of the variance of the request to, the first one having to do with the ordinance being 135 versus 150 that they're asking for. That's what we have to consider. Yes, there is so much else involved. However, we have to stick to what we're here for. And then if something more needs to be done, so be it. But consider what is being asked of us. That's
Thank you.
my comment.
I think the major issue that we've kind of skirted around is the public safety issue. Yeah, and it is twofold. It is the local residents issue, which I think has been addressed, and also the Border Patrol, the first responder unit, and the I think those are the two main ones that were discussed, which is also the public safety.
Anybody else?
Well, the only thing that's going through my mind, and it's like my colleague next to me indicated, the safety issue has to be the focus based on what is being requested. The height, again, the height is established because of safety. I know the design of the tower is modern day technology, collapses on itself, but we are in Brownsville, South Texas, Hurricane Alley. Well, thank God not any hurricane lately, but there's a possibility of a hurricane or extremely strong winds. And so the safety aspect is mine. I guess the only other thing, and listening to the comments, especially from the residents of that neighborhood, what was the thought process on picking this one piece of property? Why? I mean, if there was others that within the same neighborhood that would suffice the requirements for being close to residences or even the height, you know, why did they pick that one piece, you know, close to a residential area? I mean, that has been going through my head since I started listening to everything. But anyway, those are my comments.
Is the height requirement that we're looking at of 135, that's across the board in the city? Or is it because this is a different area or, I mean,
That's the city ordinance, right there.
right. But that's what I'm saying. So it's,
It is based on this ordinance. It is for a wireless communication facility.
right. So then we don't have any towers in Brownsville that are over 135 without a variance?
There should be after the adoption of this ordinance.
When was this adopted?
Excuse me?
When was this ordinance adopted?
I don't have that information at hand.
I can tell you that the last time it was amended was 2007.
Okay.
Thank you. Anybody else? Well, I'm going to ask for a motion on this. Let me mention that as much as we greatly appreciate what we get from our city colleagues, Mr. Ochoa and Ms. Leal, and I appreciate their opinions, the decision does not have to be made based on their recommendation. It's up to what you want to decide. You could decide to approve the variances or deny the variances. The applicant himself says he's not interested in tabling, which came up a minute ago, and the applicant also said that both variances would be necessary for him to proceed. So we've had a lot of wonderful testimony, keeping in mind we'd never get 100% agreement on having a cell tower. If that was the standard, we'd have no cell phones. So at the same time, there's some very, very good points made by all the testimony here, by all the people who came up as witnesses. That being said, I'd be happy to entertain a motion for 2019-011, which is a variance to allow 150-foot height antenna as opposed to the ordinance which requires 135.
I'll move in favor of granting the variance for 150-foot antenna as opposed to the 135.
Do I hear a second, please? All right, I'm going to second it. I think it should be put to a vote. I have a motion and a second to grant the variance for 150-foot tower antenna. Any discussion, any further discussion on that by members of the board? Just so everybody sitting outside understands, by statute, to pass a variance, we need 4 out of 5 votes. All those, and I'm going to ask you to speak up clearly, all those in favor of granting the variance for 150-foot?
I recommend a roll call vote.
Very well. Then let's take a roll call vote, and we're going to start with Mr. Vanderford.
Aye.
Nay.
Aye.
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 The variance is passed, 4 votes to 5. The statutory requires 4 votes. I'm willing to entertain a motion for variance 2019, case number 2019-012, to approve a 72.6-foot encroachment for the placement of this antenna. I'm interested in listening to a motion for the second application.
I move for the approval of the case number, the variance on case number 2019-012B.
I have a motion to approve. Do I hear a second?
Second.
I have a motion to approve and a second. Again, we will do a roll call, starting with, on this side, Mary Alice. Vote yea or nay? On
Yes.
the one you just seconded, yea or
Yea.
nay, ma'am?
Yes.
That's a yea, ma'am.
Yay.
Yea.
Yay.
The second application has been approved. Mr. McKay, both of your variances, applications have been approved. I thank everybody for all your testimony and for being here and for coming before the Board of Adjustment. Thank you all very much. Could somebody please invite Mr. De Los Santos back?
You have to vote what you feel.
You just did. Been watching you live.
I think you can step down, so.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and step down, and you can have your seat back.
Warm out there?
A little bit. It's much more comfortable in here.
That's not in there.
We should note for the record that Mr. De Los Santos is back in and Mr. Hinojosa has returned to the side and Mr. Slackman is back.
Thank you, Myrna. I believe we're down to discussion and action. Item number 8, discussion and possible action to amend section 4.6, consideration of evidence, and section 7.3, amendment procedure of the rules of procedure for the Board of Adjustment. Did copies, I think copies of what was being proposed went out to everyone, correct?
That's correct. Are you planning to discuss these together or separately, sir?
Your choice. I'm
I'd like you
open
to do it
either one,
separately, please,
but very good.
especially the vote.
Okay. So let's see, the first one, 4.6, consideration of evidence, and let me pull up the actual text.
Oh, I get it.
Oh.
I've read it, I promise. you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So for 4.6, this would be amending to change the language to read, decisions of the board shall be based solely on evidence presented during a hearing open to the public. Board members and alternates shall not conduct independent investigations into any application and shall consider only the evidence and testimony introduced at the meeting through the public hearing process and the background information presented by city staff through the information packet. Where deemed necessary, the board may request city staff obtain any additional relevant information for the board's consideration. Board members and alternates shall not engage in any ex parte communication with any party to a case which is expected to come before the Board of Adjustment. Should a board member or alternate be contacted regarding a case or potential case which will come before the Board of Adjustment, the board member must report the contact and its contents to city staff, the city attorney's office, and shall disclose such contact for the record at the Board of Adjustment meeting at which the case is scheduled to be heard. Disclosure should be made prior to the commencement of testimony from parties during the public hearing for the respective case. So what the motivating or the driving factor for this was the fact that there seemed to have been some confusion created at our orientation by council at that point, and that's not Ms. Avendaño. Mr. Chosy was present at that time. And the opinion that he offered was that this is not a quasi-judicial board, we're a quasi-legislative board. I disagreed with him at that point, and I know last month we had an applicant who made comment about people coming out to visit his site. And my concern there is that ethical standards require that there not be ex parte communications between applicants and decision makers for a quasi-judicial board, and in my opinion, that's what we are. I requested a formal opinion from the city attorney's office and received one that they agree with the position that this is a quasi-judicial board and ex parte communication should not be happening. And the recommendation from the city attorney's office was that we add language to the rules of procedure to cover that.
This is pretty well boilerplate information from other rules of procedure for other boards of adjustments.
I couldn't say that. I don't know that they've had the challenges that we have. Keep in mind with the city of Brownsville, and I think to some degree we're unique because the staff that we had supporting this board before was giving some bad direction to board members. And I think there were some practices that started because of that, and it's completely understandable given that that was what was coming down from staff. But it was erroneous, and I think if we want to make sure we're doing everything properly and in accordance with the law, we need to go a little bit further than other boards might to ensure we're correcting that.
Has council considered this and approved it?
Considered the amendment to the?
Correct.
Yes, it has been looked at by the city attorney's office and we're in agreement with the way that it has been written,
Rewritten.
rewritten.
Okay. Those were my only two concerns.
And since this is rules of procedure, if any of the alternates would like to weigh in who are still in the audience, please feel free. I don't want you guys to feel left out of the process if you have something you'd like to mention for us to consider.
I really feel that to do good justice to this committee, that when I see these cases, a lot of it's behind the fence, on the other side of the house, and you have no knowledge of what it is unless you inquire and find out what has happened and why they need to be a decision made on it. So that's how I feel about it.
And I understand and I respect that position, Mr. Metzger. I think the concern from an Open Meetings Act perspective is that we're not going out altogether to do that inspection. And so what you see might be different than what I see. And if what you're considering because of your personal inspection is not part of the record, then there's not the right justification to back up how you voted should our decision be appealed. Additionally, from a public view perspective, people could feel like, well, wait a minute, he went and had lunch with the owner, had a meeting with the owner, talked to the owner, what was said during that conversation? And so going out there and having conversations with any party to an application puts us in that position where it could raise public concern. And I think that's why ethical standards dictate that there should not be ex parte communications when it comes to quasi-judicial boards.
Okay.
I certainly would not be having dinner with the client.
I'm glad to hear that.
That's not my forte. But my forte is to try and help these people if they deserve that help. And I don't see where that can be done here if you don't have the clear facts. And you cannot see it from what these people are just presenting.
I understand. Thank you.
Okay.
May I ask, council, are staff allowed to chime in during this discussion and action for the amendments of the rules of procedure?
I don't see anything in the rules of procedure that say they cannot. For the amendments portion, if you look on amendment procedure 7.3, it says the amendments to these rules of procedure may be made by the board at any meeting upon the affirmative vote of a majority, but it doesn't say anything about discussion, so.
But you guys can absolutely chime in. I think all of us would welcome any comments or concerns you guys have.
Thank you. The only comment I have is that when the department is a fair department, we listen to the applicants, we ensure, that all of their items are being addressed. Any additional information that they wish to, as you saw with one of the items that we saw today, they submitted a lot of exhibits. All of that information was provided. And one of the things we are sure to tell all of the applicants that come in, no matter whether it's a large case, a controversial case, or a simple sidewalk variance, we let them know whatever you feel is gonna help you make your case, please submit that. Anything at all. Let us know and we will share that with the board. So we give them that opportunity. And I did want to state that is something that we do let the applicants know. Whatever you think is going to help you, whatever is going to help make your case, provide that, and we will share it with the board. And that is something that we have done in the past.
Thank you, Myrna.
Well, I was going to wait till a motion was made, but I'll go through it now. On Monday of this week, I met with Rene DeCos, the city attorney. And we had a private meeting. It was a lengthy meeting, and I conveyed to him that from my experience after viewing hundreds of cases over the last almost 5 years that I've been doing this, that as Mr. Metzger correctly stated, you do not get the same information, you do not get the same feeling, you do not get the same understanding of the cases submitted without actually seeing three-dimensionally what's going on. That's not in 100% of the cases, but in most of the cases, getting out and seeing the case makes a major difference. I've said this before, I feel it sincerely, and as Mr. Metzger, who has been a recent alternate member, has gone out with me, he's seen it as well, and he felt strongly enough even to get up and state it, despite his lack of experience. He got it very quickly. Going over this with Mr. DeCos and letting him know that I felt that it was overturning what has been a fact with the Board of Adjustments for many years, something that we were encouraged to do, is not in the best interest of our applicants, it's not in the best interest of the city of Brownsville, to constrain our ability to gather information. We talked about the fact that to the extent that we make decisions, we're quasi-judicial, but that there's nobody in this room who is on trial. There's nobody in this room who's going to jail. We're just getting to that point of restrictions is just simply not necessary, and it's certainly not necessary to the extent of cutting off a very important avenue of us getting information, which is going out and putting eyes on property. At the end of that meeting, Mr. DeCoste shared with me that everything I said may be true, but he did say that due to the fact that we could have an appeal, especially on a denied variance, and an appeal could be based on due process and other legal aspects that some of which was stated in your memorandum, some of which our chairman has stated, and that these things could come up and be a problem. And I finalized with him the discussion by saying, to my knowledge, it's never happened. To my experience, it's very rare that something like that would happen. And to turn the Board of Adjustments around and cut us off from what we've been able to do for so many years and do, I think, effectively, at least from my standpoint, I think I've been able to bring things to many cases that I was able to see that did not come across in the photographs. I didn't think it was worth it. And just to take it one step further, even if a decision at some point in time is appealed, it's not the end of the world. That's why the legal department is there to do the logistics that they have to go to court if they have to in that situation. It's not such a great threat that this kind of change, this kind of major change, which is happening tonight in the Board of Adjustment, to mandate that from now on, board members cannot put eyes on a property. This is a major change. I want everybody in this room to know that this is not a minor change in these rules. This is not business as usual. Our assistant city attorney and our city attorney, from my conversation with him, have made this decision, perhaps based on your recommendation, Mr. Chairman. But in any case, I feel very bad about it. I've been doing this for years, and I don't think it's in the best interest of our board. I don't think it's in the best interest of our applicants or for the city, and I'm very unhappy to see it happening.
Let me say to that, there's nothing in the language that prohibits a board member from laying any eyes on the property. The real concern here is that there have been conversations with applicants. Yes. Even if it's as simple as, hey, do you mind, hi, I'm here to check out your backyard because you've got a variance coming up before our board. You're having interaction with an applicant. That's an ex parte communication, which under the standards of due process is not fair, based on the way the process is supposed to be designed. I know that's how Brownsville operated for many years, but in that same vein for many years, and when I first joined this board, I witnessed it firsthand. We weren't even asking if there was a variance, even though the law requires that there be, that there was a hardship, even though the law requires that a hardship be present in order for us to then exercise our discretion in granting what type of variance we think is appropriate. That standard wasn't being adhered to, and it was an eye-opening experience, I think, for the staff at that time, that they now had to prove a case or that there was something different we were looking at. This board was not just going to rubber stamp things, but it was an absolutely necessary step because we want to be a board whose decisions are above reproach and will hold up in court. And while we have a city's attorney's office to go to court and defend our decisions, they need to have a strong case. And if we're not following standards of due process, it's going to be very challenging for them to be able to defend the city of Brownsville in court.
Two things to speak to your statement. In speaking with Mr. Kinch, yes, at least once in the history of Brownsville's Board of Adjustment has a decision been appealed. He was presiding chair at the time, and I believe it had to do with the slaughterhouse, but at any rate, it did, and I believe the decision was upheld. But we have gone to court over one of these.
And I think tonight, again, I wasn't in the room to participate in the proceedings, but I was watching the remote feed. I think it was pretty clear from the attorney who was presenting that had the variance been denied, they were planning to go to court next, is what it sounded like to me. So,
Dylan, you know how much I like you, but what comes to mind in your statement is that the exception proves the rule. But anyway, did you have anything else?
The other thing is, it's more of a personal deal, not directed at your statements.
Okay.
But I think this is some insulation for each of us. You only have to be sued and lose once to know that you don't want to be involved in a lawsuit. And this is the kind of insulation that I think we all ought to consider.
and let me say also for those board, and in the past, I had even driven by properties and looked at them, would never get out of my vehicle because I didn't even want the chance of someone coming up and saying, can I help you? Because they saw me looking at their property. I would always do it from across the street, drive by, that was it. And I'm not encouraging that. But I don't think anybody who's gone and even interacted with an applicant, I don't think anybody's up to anything nefarious. I don't think anybody's up to anything shady. I just feel like if we were an advisory board giving a recommendation to staff or recommendation to city commission, the standard would be different. But because we are the final decision for the city of Brownsville, and our mandate comes from the state of Texas on what burden has to be met, and that we're quasi-judicial, the standard we should be held to is higher. And I think this does that for us.
And if I can just add, the concern that the legal department has is that when one board member goes out to the location to look at the property or speaks with an individual or whatever the case may be, that person technically becomes a fact witness, and they could be cross-examined and questioned, and at that point in time, they shouldn't have no voting. They shouldn't have a voting right. It's just that simple. It's as if you're judge and jury sitting up there as the Board of Adjustment, and you're supposed to look at the facts that are presented to you against the law that you've been provided. You're not supposed to go and collect the facts yourself. It's like in a jury trial. One of the very simple instructions that a jury is given from the judge at the beginning of the trial is, do not research this on the internet. Do not talk to anybody about this case. Do not go to the crime scene. Do not go to the site where it happened. Do not do any of these things. You are supposed to only consider the evidence brought before you. The evidence brought before you is by the city department sitting over there, the applicants that come here before the board. If you feel as if you don't have enough to go forward at that point on the variance that you want to deny or go ahead and grant, you can ask them to table it and come back with whatever the case may be. I mean, you can ask them to go get a video of this property. You can ask the applicant, please, I can't see this section of the line. I don't know where the encroachment ends, where it begins, how you're saying it's going to affect the neighbors who are against it. There are many solutions to the problem other than the board member himself or herself going out to the property to do an inspection or to speak with someone there.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue because I've made my statement, but with regard to what you said, Assistant City Attorney John Chosier said many times the mistake that's being made here, and I use the word mistake with due respect for the chairman and for yourself, the mistake being made here is comparing this to a jury trial and a court of law. It is not the same thing. Again, at least that's a matter of opinion, but I'm finished.
Let me say to that point, we know for a fact that Mr. Chosey has given us bad information. When he said this is a quasi-legislative board, that is incorrect, because we don't have the discretion to just say, you know what, this is a nice guy, it's a nice carport he wants to build, I don't have a problem with it, let's go ahead and grant it. We don't have discretion like that. We're not legislative, because at the legislative level you can do stuff like that. We have to determine, is the bar that the state of Texas has set that there be a hardship, has that been met? So here's the law, and we're determining where it fits within that law, and that's why it's a judicial role and judge and jury. So I understand how he feels, that he thinks it's a mistake to compare that way, but it's also because he thinks we're not quasi-judicial. And everyone from the American Planning Association to the training sessions we've had with city staff, up the valley with APA Texas, and even decisions from the Supreme Court of Texas and the appellate courts, all are in agreement that the Board of Adjustment is a quasi-judicial board.
If I may make a statement, packets are delivered a week before. Sometimes they'll be sent the Thursday morning instead of the Wednesday before the meeting. We do encourage board members to review those packets. If ever there's a request for more information, if there's not information within those packets, there are a few days before the meeting where they can reach out, and staff could assist with that as well.
Any other discussion? I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
There is a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion by Mr. Vanderford, second by Mrs. Loya. Sorry, Mrs. Garcia.
Okay,
Ms. Garcia, excuse me.
thank you.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay.
Nay.
The motion passes 4-1. For 7.3 amendment procedure, the proposed language would read, amendments to these rules of procedure may be approved by the board at any meeting upon the affirmative vote of a majority, so long as any such amendment was proposed at a preceding meeting and recorded in the minutes of such meeting. The driving motivation behind this one was simply that I think the language was confusing by giving the option for adopting something the same night it first comes up by unanimous consent. And I think we saw that also at the meeting in August of last year, where the board thought something was approved as far as rules of procedure went, but there were only 4 board members present, which means it's not 5. So I think it lent itself to confusion of how to do this, and I think that the new language clarifies that and still ensures the protection of having these read into the record first, which means everyone has at least a month to consider it. But the standard is still the same. It's a majority is what would be needed to approve. And tonight, this is the same thing. This is really just a discussion item tonight because it needs to go into the record, which is what is happening tonight. So a second vote would have to be taken at the next meeting to officially amend the rules of procedure.
So essentially, we'd be voting twice on the same
Yes.
thing.
We did that in August and October. Other discussion?
Legal signed off on this one as well?
Yes.
Yes.
And I guess technically we don't need a vote, and probably didn't need the last vote since it has to carry over to the next meeting, correct?
I mean, it's good to note that it's going to go before the board again, so yes, technically you would need it.
Very good.
Otherwise, it wouldn't be on the next agenda.
That works. I'll entertain a motion to approve so that this carries forward to the next agenda.
So moved.
Second.
There is a motion by Mr. Vanderford, a second by Mrs. Loya.
Do
Any
we-
other discussion?
Do we need 2 votes for one item?
Well, there are 2 amendments listed in this
Okay,
item.
so we're handling
They
them
were-
separately?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to verify.
And I think it was up here, we chose to separate it, that's why. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. Motion carries unanimously.
Mr. Chairman, I have a motion with regard to these rules that we're talking about.
Yes, sir.
At the conclusion of my meeting with Mr. Rene DeCas, he recommended that rather than going to visit the properties, which he did not agree with, that we film all the properties. We tape and film all the properties, and right here in the hearing room, show the films that more closely demonstrate in a 3-dimensional way and a broader way what we have to decide on. And he felt that that would go a long way to help us make the best decisions, and that was his recommendation. I spoke with Constanza Mina, the director of our department, and shared with her Mr. DeCasa's recommendation. And her comment to me is, well, I don't have the equipment today, but if this is what the board wants us to do, she says, I'll see that it gets done. So what I'd like to do is make a motion in this regard, but I'm going to ask our counsel, since this aspect of what we're discussing is not on the agenda, Can I attach it to what we're doing tonight and make the motion now? Or do I have to wait to a future date to put it on the agenda?
I would wait to a future date to put it on the agenda so that there's notice given to the public, because at this point in time, as you can see, there's no one here to be able to either stand up and say anything, or anybody from the city department to have any say-so in the matter as well.
Okay, I'll just share with the board that I plan to ask the city to put this on the agenda for
And I
our,
don't see that as a problem.
for our next meeting. Thank you very
Correct.
much.
And one other item I think we need to add to a future agenda, and I've talked to our assistant city attorney about this as well, and actually she raised this concern, is as part of what we do, there should be findings of fact, written findings of fact, so that if something were appealed in court, there would be a record that's more easily reviewed by the court. That was something that was part of the orientation we had in 2016. We even had sample forms for that, but staff at that time never implemented it. And I think we're at a point now where it would make sense for us to do it. The recommendation from the assistant city attorney was that we take this up at a future meeting. So I just wanted to give you guys a heads up that that'll be a future agenda item as well.
Does this require any expertise on the, specific expertise on the staff's portion to be able to complete these forms?
No, not the way it was designed by, and I think it was designed by Allison Bastion at the time, but it was based on an attachment to a presentation by Alan Borges, and that was part of our orientation as well. And it gave you several questions, and it was just a check yes or check no. Very simple. And of course, we'll have our current city attorney staff look at it as well and see if they have any recommendations for changes or adjustments to that.
Good.
All right, anything else before we move to adjourn?
That's going to be this lady's job.
Since you're sitting in for Mr. Kinch, he's normally the one who makes the motion to adjourn, so.
Make a motion to adjourn the meeting, please.
I'll second that.
Motion by Ms. Garcia, second by Mr. Slackman. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Meeting adjourned.